In our previous video, we looked at the Bootstrap documentation. One of the most important parts of good documentation is leading the user through the installation process. But what exactly are we installing? Well, at its core, Bootstrap is simply a set of CSS and JavaScript files created by the developers at Twitter. These files make up the source code for the Bootstrap library, and because it's an open source project, it's available to browse over on GitHub. It's important to get comfortable browsing the source code itself to learn how a library works. Let's have a quick look to get ourselves acquainted. The first thing we want to check is that we're looking at the correct version of the code. We're interested in version 4, but by default on GitHub we're looking at the most up-to-date version of the code, sometimes called the bleeding edge. So we need to switch versions. We can do this by clicking on the branch button and selecting tags. Then we can select the latest version, version 4.1.3. Bear in mind that the ability to use these tags to track versions is up to the developer to implement, so you're not always going to get it in every library you come across. So let's find the actual CSS file that contains the code we're interested in. We're interested in the dist folder, which stands for distribution, and this is the folder that includes the ready-to-use code. Usually when creating libraries like Bootstrap, the developers will work on a number of smaller files to make their lives easier, and then assemble them all together into a single file when they're ready to release a final version. This process is called concatenation. The reason for doing this is that it's faster for the end users to download a single file, rather than having to download a number of smaller files separately. So these concatenated files are what you see here in the dist folder. Notice too that each CSS file also has a counterpart with a .min in the file name. So what is this? Well, these are called minified files. When releasing libraries, websites and applications, it's good practice to try and make your files as small as possible. This is so you can improve the page loading times when the end user eventually downloads your file. This process is called minification, and it's usually a step you take before releasing a new version. It's also convention to name these files with a .min in the file name. So if we open one, we'll notice that it's just a long line of text with no spaces or anything in between. I'll click on the bootstrap.min.css, and then we're going to click on the raw button here just so that we can see the file in its entirety. Now, as we see, this is very difficult for you or I to read, but to the browser it makes absolutely no difference at all. As an aside, you might also be curious as to what these .map files are for. These are called source maps, and it's outside the scope of this unit. We do actually have a look at this a little bit later on, but you can Google them to learn a bit more if you're interested. So let's open the Bootstrap file, the main one, bootstrap.css. As you can see, this is a huge file that contains all of the relevant CSS styles. As an example, let's try to find the styling for a particular button element, so that we can see exactly how it's put together. Firstly, we'll switch back to the documentation to find the name of the element as well as the relevant class name. So I'm going to go to Components and click on Buttons. And here we can see that the warning button, for example, has a class name of btn-warning. So I'm going to copy that, go back to my Bootstrap CSS file, paste it in, and search for it. Now we can see exactly what styles are applied to it and how it functions. Getting comfortable with the source code like this is an important skill, and it will definitely help you to troubleshoot and better understand what you're working with. So now that we're familiar with the source code, how do we actually go ahead and start installing and using Bootstrap? Well, the first thing you're going to need to do is create a new workspace in Cloud 9. If you're unfamiliar with this process, then go back and check on a previous lesson that goes through it step by step. When the workspace is up and running, we're going to delete the README file and create a file called index.html. In here, we'll create a basic page template by using the exclamation mark and pressing Tab to insert the standard Cloud9 HTML boilerplate. In our page, I'm going to create a H1 header that says this is a test, and a paragraph that says hello world. Underneath that, we'll create a button that says click me. When that's created, we'll click run, and then we can see it running in the browser. As we can see, this is just a standard unstyled page with a H1, a paragraph, and a button. So now let's put the Bootstrap files in place and see how this changes. When you're developing in the front end, there are a number of ways to include an external library in your website. The easiest is just to link the required files in the head of your page using the link element. So we're going to grab the information here from the Bootstrap CDN. I'm going to click on Copy, go back to my HTML file, and paste those links into the head. Now you'll notice that the address in this documentation isn't from GitHub, where we already viewed the assembled distribution file. Instead, it's actually hosted on something called a CDN. A CDN is a content delivery network, which is a service you can use to host your source code to ensure that people always have fast access to your files. It uses a network of servers around the globe to always deliver the closest version of your files to the user depending on their location. It won't be necessary for you to use a CDN for your projects, but for big projects like Bootstrap, jQuery, and other things that we're going to look at throughout this course, a CDN is very helpful. When we paste the CDN link into the head of our website, as we have done here, and refresh the page, we can see that our basic styles have changed. This shows us that Bootstrap is up and running, and we have our first dependency installed. In our next video, we'll start creating a landing page which begins to show the real power of Bootstrap.